the sacred band of Thebes. You hear the bronze clashing before you see them. 378 before the Common Era. The plains outside Leuctra, your Spartan phalanx has never lost. Not once in 2 centuries. But something's wrong with the enemy line approaching through the dust. They're not retreating. They're not even wavering. The Theban formation moves like a single organism. Each warrior fights not just for victory, but for the man beside him. Literally, beside him. In bed, in love, in death. This was the sacred band of Thebes, and they broke the spine of Spartan supremacy forever. The unit was documented by Plutarch in his Life of Pelopidas, written around 100 Common Era, nearly 4 centuries after the band's destruction. According to his account, the sacred band consisted of exactly 150 pairs of male lovers, 300 warriors total, organized by the Theban general Gorgidas around 378 before the Common Era. Plutarch writes that each pair consisted of an older Erastes, or lover, and a younger Eromenos, or beloved, bound together by both sacred oaths and physical intimacy. The archaeological evidence supports Plutarch's claims. In 1929, Greek archaeologist Spyridon Marinatos excavated a mass grave at Chaeronea containing exactly 254 skeletons arranged in 7 rows. The spacing and positioning matched historical accounts of the sacred band's final battle formation. Radiocarbon dating confirmed the remains dated to 338 before the Common Era, the precise year of the Battle of Chaeronea, where Philip of Macedon finally destroyed the unit. Here's what made this impossible. For 40 years, the sacred band never lost a battle. Not retreated, not regrouped, never lost. From their first engagement at Tegeira in 375, before the Common Era, where they annihilated 2 Spartan Mora units, through the decisive Battle of Leuctra in 371, before the Common Era, where they shattered the myth of Spartan invincibility, the sacred band remained undefeated for 4 decades of continuous warfare. Military historians have calculated that a typical Greek hoplite unit suffered approximately 15 to 20% casualties in major engagements before breaking formation and retreating. Elite units might sustain 25% losses before withdrawal. The sacred band routinely fought to casualty rates exceeding 50% without retreating. At the Battle of Chaeronea, they fought until only 46 of the original 300 remained standing. The mainstream explanation focuses on superior training and equipment. The Theban military system, reformed by Epaminondas, emphasized deeper phalanx formations and innovative tactics, like the oblique order attack. The sacred band received the finest bronze armor, Corinthian helmets, and 8-foot spears. They trained daily in both individual combat and unit cohesion exercises. Their battlefield success, according to conventional military analysis, resulted from this combination of tactical innovation, superior equipment, and intensive drilling. But this explanation cannot account for the unit's psychological resilience under extreme casualties. Modern military studies show that unit cohesion breaks down rapidly once losses exceed 25%, regardless of training quality. The strongest bonds between soldiers shared hardship, mutual dependence, unit pride, typically dissolve under the reality of watching comrades die. Yet the sacred band consistently maintained formation and fighting effectiveness at casualty levels that should have triggered immediate psychological collapse. Some researchers suggest the homosexual bond created an entirely different category of military motivation. Classical scholar James Davidson, in his 2007 work, The Greeks and Greek Love, argues that the Erastes-Eromenos relationship generated a form of battlefield psychology unknown in conventional military units. The prospect of displaying cowardice before one's lover, of surviving while one's beloved died, created psychological pressures that overrode normal self-preservation instincts. Ancient sources support this interpretation. Plutarch records that sacred band warriors fought not so much for their country as for their lovers. Xenophon, writing in his Symposium around 360 before the Common Era, observed that armies composed of lovers would be virtually invincible because each would prefer to die 1,000 deaths rather than be seen by his beloved abandoning his post or throwing away his arms. The unit's final destruction at Chaeronea provides the most compelling evidence for this theory. Facing Philip's 16-year-old son, Alexander, and a combined Macedonian allied force twice their size, the Sacred Band held the center of the line while the rest of the Greek coalition fled. They died in formation, still holding their battle positions. Philip reportedly wept when he saw the carnage. Was their bond really stronger than the fear of death? Could love actually create superhuman courage on the battlefield? Why did no other Greek city-state attempt to replicate this model? What would have happened if Alexander had faced 3,000 sacred bands instead of 300? But even the sacred band's extraordinary cohesion paled before the organizational genius emerging from the Mongolian steppes, where an entirely different approach to military structure was about to reshape warfare across 3 continents. The Mongol decimal system. You stand in the dust of Samarkand, 12, 20. The city burns behind you, but you're not watching the flames. You're watching something impossible unfold in the steppe beyond. 10,000 horsemen wheel in perfect formation, not the chaotic charge you expected from nomads. Mathematical precision. Units of 10 become units of 100. Units of 100 become units of 1,000. Each group responds to horn signals like clockwork. In minutes, they've reorganized from a single mass into 40 independent strike forces. Each knows exactly where to go. Each knows exactly what to do. No European army has ever moved like this. The organizational structure that made this possible was documented by Persian chronicler Juvayni in his History of the World Conqueror, completed in 1260. He recorded how Genghis Khan, in 1206, abolished traditional tribal structures and reorganized his entire military around units of 10. The Arban, 10 men. The Jagun, 100 men. The Mingan, 1,000 men. The Tumen, 10,000 men. Military historian David Morgan of the University of London, in his 1986 study, The Mongols, demonstrated how this decimal system allowed unprecedented battlefield coordination across armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands. Each unit operated with complete tactical independence, while maintaining strategic cohesion with the whole. Commanders at every level understood their role in the larger mathematical structure. A Tumen leader could deploy his 10,000 men as a single hammer blow, or split them into 1,000 separate raids, each maintaining communication through an intricate system of signals and messengers. Dr. Timothy May's research at the University of North Georgia, published in The Mongol Conquests in World History in 2012, documented how this system allowed Mongol armies to coordinate across fronts, spanning thousands of kilometers simultaneously. The mainstream explanation credits Genghis Khan's administrative genius for creating a system that transformed tribal raiders into a professional military machine. Historians point to the meritocratic promotion structure within the decimal units, where advancement came through battlefield performance rather than birth. They note how the mixing of tribal groups within each unit destroyed old loyalties and created new ones based on military effectiveness. This explanation accounts for why the Mongol military could expand so rapidly while maintaining discipline across vast distances. But the speed of implementation defies conventional understanding of military transformation. John Mann, in his 2004 biography, Genghis Khan, Life, Death, and Resurrection, documented that the complete reorganization of Mongol society took less than 2 years. Every warrior was reassigned. Every tribal structure was dissolved. Every command relationship was rebuilt from scratch. Military reform of this magnitude typically takes generations. The Roman legions evolved over centuries. Modern military doctrine develops through decades of institutional learning. Yet the Mongols achieved total organizational transformation in the span of a single campaign season. The mathematical elegance suggests influence beyond nomadic tradition. Dr. Alson Thomas of the College of New Jersey, in his 1987 work, Mongol Imperialism, noted striking parallels between Mongol decimal organization and Chinese military treatises dating to the Warring States period. But no evidence exists of sustained Chinese influence on Genghis Khan before 1206. Some researchers suggest the system emerged from practical necessity during early tribal consolidations. Others point to possible transmission of organizational knowledge through Silk Road merchants or captured administrators. The operational effectiveness remains unprecedented in military history. Professor Jackson Peter of Kiel University calculated that Mongol armies achieved force multiplication ratios exceeding 10 to 1 against contemporary opponents. They conquered territories in months that had resisted other invaders for centuries. The Jin dynasty, with fortified cities and millions of defenders, fell in 23 years. The Khwarezmid Empire, spanning modern Iran and Central Asia, collapsed in 3 years. Kievan Rus, with its network of fortified cities, was overrun in 5 years. No other military organization in history achieved comparable strategic speed across such vast territories. Mathematical precision in command and control allowed tactical innovations that seem impossible for 13th century armies. Mongol forces could execute complex maneuvers, requiring split-second timing across battlefields dozens of kilometers wide. They could maintain supply lines stretching across continents. They could coordinate intelligence gathering and strategic deception on a scale that modern militaries struggle to match. The decimal system provided the organizational framework that made all of this possible. How did nomadic herders develop organizational principles that modern armies still use? Why did this mathematical approach to warfare emerge precisely when it did? What knowledge traditions influenced a system that had no obvious precedents? Can administrative genius alone explain transformation this rapid and this complete? The Mongols proved that war could be mathematics, but the Hussites would prove that mathematics could be revolution. The Hussite war wagons. The screaming starts before dawn. You're crouched behind wooden planks that smell of pig manure and hay. Through gaps in the boards, you watch steel-clad knights thunder across the Bohemian hillside. Their war horses shake the earth. Their lances catch morning light like deadly stars. These are professional killers. Men who've spent lifetimes perfecting the art of mounted warfare. You're a farmer holding a crossbow you barely know how to use. The knights smash into your circle of chained farm wagons, and something impossible happens. They break. The greatest military force in medieval Europe shatters against wooden carts driven by peasants who learned warfare from Sunday sermons. The Hussite Wars erupted in 1419 when Bohemian reformers rejected Catholic authority, and Rome responded with 5 separate crusades. Dr. Frederick Hayman's seminal study, John Žižka and the Hussite Revolution, published by Princeton University Press in 1955, documented how a one-eyed former mercenary named Jan Žižka transformed agricultural wagons into mobile fortresses that would dominate European battlefields for 17 years. Žižka's innovation was deceptively simple. He chained farm wagons into defensive circles, called wagenburg, mounted small cannons and crossbows through slots cut in the wagon sides, and trained peasant crews to operate as coordinated units. Each wagon carried a specific load. Some held ammunition, others housed artillery, still others served as mobile hospitals. The crews included crossbowmen, handgunners, flail-wielding infantry, and cavalry held in reserve inside the circle. What makes this impossible is the timeline. Military historians universally agree that combined arms warfare, the coordinated use of infantry, artillery, and cavalry as integrated tactical units, emerged during the Renaissance. Around 1500, the concept required sophisticated military theory, professional officer corps, and decades of technological development. Maurice of Nassau is credited with perfecting these tactics in the Dutch Revolt of 1566 to 1588. The Swedish king Gustavus Adolphus supposedly revolutionized European warfare by implementing combined arms doctrine during the 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648. Yet Dr. Thomas Fudge's exhaustive analysis in The Magnificent Ride, the first Reformation in Hussite Bohemia, published by Ashgate in 1998, provides battlefield records showing Žižka's peasant armies consistently defeated professional forces using textbook combined arms, tactics. At the Battle of Kutna Hora in 1421, Hussite war wagons coordinated crossbow volleys with artillery barrages, while cavalry sallied from protected positions to strike retreating enemies. At Niemiecki Brod in 1422, they used feigned retreats to draw knights into killing zones where concentrated firepower could penetrate heavy armor. The mainstream explanation is that the Hussites stumbled upon effective defensive tactics through desperate innovation. Peasant armies naturally sought protection behind improvised barriers. The combination of firearms, crossbows, and melee weapons emerged organically from available resources rather than systematic military doctrine. Their success reflected the decline of heavy cavalry's dominance rather than revolutionary tactical thinking. But the battlefield evidence contradicts this interpretation. Surviving Hussite military manuals, preserved in the Prague State Archives and analyzed by Dr. František Šmahel in his definitive work Die Hussitische Revolution, published by Monumenta Germaniae Historica in 2002, reveals sophisticated tactical theory. These documents describe coordinated movement patterns, standardized wagon configurations, and integrated command structures that mirror advanced military doctrine. The Hussites didn't stumble upon combined arms warfare. They systematically developed it. More troubling still are the technical specifications. Each war wagon required precise engineering, reinforced axles to support artillery weight, standardized wheel gauges for coordinated movement, carefully calculated firing ports for maximum field coverage. The logistics alone, coordinating hundreds of wagons with thousands of crew members across hostile territory, demanded military organization that supposedly didn't exist until the professional armies of the 17th century. How did medieval peasants master tactical concepts that would challenge professional officers 2 centuries later? Why do their military manuals read like Renaissance-era doctrine written in 1420? What happened to this sophisticated military knowledge after the Hussite Wars ended? Could other medieval armies have achieved similar innovations that history simply forgot? While Europe struggled to understand the Hussite Revolution, far to the east, another military force had already perfected the art of combining overwhelming numbers with tactical precision in ways that would define empire for centuries. The immortals. You feel the ground shake before you see them. The rhythm is wrong, too perfect, too synchronized for mortal feet. Dust rises from the eastern horizon in a line so straight it might have been drawn with a ruler. Then they emerge from the heat shimmer, like a fever dream made flesh. 10,000 soldiers, moving as one organism, their spear points catching sunlight in a constellation of death. Each man identical in height, armor, and bearing. Each face hidden behind a mask of gold and bronze. And you realize, watching from the walls of your doomed city, that you are looking at something that should not exist in the mortal world. The immortals of Cyrus the Great represented the most psychologically devastating military innovation in ancient warfare. Dr. Pierre Briand of the Sorbonne, in his definitive work From Cyrus to Alexander, published in 2002, documented how this elite guard maintained their exact number of 10,000 men through a recruitment system so efficient it bordered on the supernatural. When an immortal fell in battle, his replacement materialized seemingly instantly from the ranks, equipped identically, trained to identical standards, maintaining the terrifying illusion that the unit itself was deathless. The Persian archives, preserved in cuneiform tablets at Persepolis and translated by Professor Matthew Stolper of the University of Chicago, reveal the administrative machinery behind this miracle. The immortals were recruited from across the Persian Empire's 23 satrapies, each province required to maintain a reserve pool of fully trained warriors. These reserves underwent years of identical conditioning at facilities in Media and Persis, emerging as perfect copies of their predecessors. The Behistun inscription, carved by Darius I around 515 before the Common Era, boasts that his immortals neither grow weary nor diminish in number. Archaeological evidence from battlefields across 3 continents confirms their impact. At Marathon in 490, before the Common Era, Greek pottery fragments depict the immortals not as men, but as golden-masked demons. Herodotus, writing in the Histories around 440 before the Common Era, describes how enemy armies would surrender at the mere sight of their approach. The Lydian king Croesus, according to Herodotus, claimed that fighting the immortals was like battling the dead who refused to die. The mainstream explanation is straightforward military logistics. The Persians simply maintained excellent records and rapid communication networks. When casualties occurred, messages traveled via the royal road system to the nearest recruitment center, and replacements marched to rejoin their units. The psychological impact came from superior organization, not supernatural intervention. But the mathematics of replacement tells a different story. Dr. Josef Wiesehofer of the University of Kiel, in his analysis Ancient Persia, published in 2001, calculated that maintaining 10,000 active immortals would have required a reserve pool of at least 30,000 identically trained warriors across an empire spanning 3 million square miles. The coordination necessary to ensure instant replacement during active campaigns would have demanded communication speeds that exceed what was technologically possible with horse-mounted messengers. Some researchers suggest the Persians possessed organizational capabilities that modern military theorists are only beginning to understand. The immortals served as the spine of Persian military doctrine for 219 years. From Cyrus's conquest of Lydia in 546, before the Common Era, until their final defeat by Alexander at Gaugamela in 331, before the Common Era. Yet no contemporary source ever records meeting a wounded immortal, encountering an immortal veteran, or finding an immortal grave. They appear fully formed in history and vanish just as completely, leaving behind only the testimony of their terrified enemies and the mathematical impossibility of their existence. How does an army maintain perfect numbers across centuries of warfare? What training could produce soldiers so identical that enemies could not tell them apart? Why do no records exist of individual immortals, only the unit itself? Could military organization alone create the illusion of deathlessness? What did the Persians understand about warfare that we have forgotten? But Persia's monopoly on elite military units would not last forever, and in the sands of Egypt, a different kind of warrior elite was already stirring: the Mamluks. The sand beneath your horse's hooves is already soaked with blood. It's 1250, and you're watching something that should be impossible: slave soldiers turning on the very Ayyubid masters who trained them. The Bahri Mamluks have seized Cairo, not through rebellion, through precision. They don't destroy the palace, they occupy it. They don't murder the Sultan's family, they pension them. This isn't chaos. This is a military coup executed with the same disciplined perfection they learned in the barracks, and you're witnessing the birth of a warrior caste that will reshape the medieval world for the next 267 years. The Mamluk military system emerged from one of history's most counterintuitive strategies. The Ayyubid sultans, following earlier Islamic military traditions, deliberately purchased young boys from the steppes of Central Asia and the Caucasus, primarily Kipchak, Turks, and Circassians, to train as elite cavalry. These Mamluks, literally meaning owned ones in Arabic, were removed from their families between ages 8 and 12, converted to Islam, and subjected to rigorous military education in Egyptian barracks called tabakat. Dr. David Ayalon's seminal 3-volume work, Studies on the Mamluks of Egypt, published between 1967 and 79, drawing from extensive Arabic chronicles, documented the systematic nature of their training. Each Mamluk received 15 years of intensive education in horsemanship, archery, swordsmanship, Islamic law, and Arabic literature. They lived in complete isolation from civilian society, creating bonds of loyalty that transcended tribal or ethnic origins. The system produced approximately 1,000 to 1,500 elite cavalrymen per generation, according to tax records analyzed by Professor Reuven Amitai of Hebrew University. When the Bahri Mamluks overthrew their Ayyubid masters in 1250, they didn't destroy the system that created them, they perfected it. Under Sultan Baybars, who ruled from 1260 to 1277, they developed what military historian Dr. Peter Jackson called the most effective combined arms doctrine of the medieval period. The Mamluks integrated their legendary mounted archery with Greek fire, siege engines, and naval warfare, creating a military machine capable of fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously. The mainstream explanation for Mamluk military dominance focuses on their superior training and organizational structure. Medieval chroniclers and modern historians alike emphasize their disciplined recruitment system, advanced metallurgy that produced Damascus steel, and tactical innovations like feigned retreats and concentrated arrow storms. The Mamluks spent decades mastering mounted archery techniques that allowed them to accurately shoot while galloping at full speed, reload in seconds, and coordinate complex battlefield maneuvers through horn signals and banner movements. But the training alone cannot explain what the Mamluks accomplished between 1250 and 1517. They faced the two most formidable military forces of their era, the Mongol Empire at its peak, and the combined might of Christian Europe during the Crusades, and defeated both decisively. At Ain Jalut in 1260, a Mamluk army of approximately 20,000 cavalry stopped a Mongol force that had conquered everything from Korea to Poland. The Mongols had never been permanently defeated in pitched battle before. The mathematical odds were impossible. More troubling for conventional military analysis is the Mamluks' consistent tactical superiority over European heavy cavalry, despite fighting in terrain that favored mounted knights. During the siege of Antioch in 1268, Baibars captured the supposedly impregnable fortress in just 4 days, using siege techniques that European engineers couldn't replicate. Contemporary Frankish chronicles describe Mamluk cavalry archery as achieving accuracy rates that modern Olympic archers struggle to match, even with compound bows and stationary targets. The archaeological evidence compounds the mystery. Excavations at Fustat, directed by Dr. George Scanlon and published in the American Journal of Archaeology in 1984, revealed Mamluk weapons manufacturing facilities with industrial-scale production capabilities. They were producing steel arrows by the hundreds of thousands, suggesting logistical planning that surpassed contemporary European military organization by centuries. The quality of Mamluk Damascus steel, analyzed through electron microscopy by Dr. Oleg Sherby at Stanford, shows carbon nanotube structures that weren't understood by metallurgists until the 20th century. Some researchers suggest the Mamluk system represented an evolutionary leap in military organization, the world's first professional standing army with standardized training, equipment, and doctrine. Others point to evidence of technological innovations that seem anachronistic for the 13th century, including references in Arabic military manuals to explosive devices and incendiary weapons whose compositions remain mysterious. How did purchased slave children become the most feared cavalry force in medieval history? Why could they consistently defeat armies with superior numbers and established military traditions? What specific techniques allowed their mounted archers to achieve accuracy rates that seem impossible for the era? Can systematic training alone explain tactical innovations that wouldn't reappear in European warfare for 300 years? The Mamluk legacy raises questions about military evolution that extend far beyond medieval Egypt, particularly when examining other warrior castes who achieved dominance through heavy cavalry charges rather than mounted archery. The Cataphract heavy cavalry. The ground shakes. You feel it through your sandals before you hear it, a low rumble that grows into thunder. The Persian scouts are screaming warnings as they gallop back toward your Roman lines. Their horses foam at the mouth. Their eyes show pure terror. Then you see it. A wall of steel moving across the desert plain. Not men, not horses, something between both and neither. Armored shapes that catch the sun and throw it back in blinding flashes. The sound builds. Metal on metal on metal. 1,000 pieces of scale armor breathing as one massive serpent. These are cataphracts, and they are coming for you. The archaeological evidence for these armored juggernauts spans over a millennium of battlefield dominance. Dr. Marek Olbrich's comprehensive study, published in Iranica Antiqua in 2010, documents cataphract units from the 4th century before the Common Era through the 6th century Common Era. The Dura Europos excavations, led by Yale University between 1928 and 1937, uncovered complete sets of both horse and rider armor that revealed the shocking sophistication of Persian military technology. The armor itself defied everything historians thought they knew about ancient metallurgy. Professor Boris Marshak's analysis of Sogdian cataphract remains, published in his 1986 work Silbergeschirr und andere Metallobjekte, showed that a single horse and rider set contained over 3,000 individual iron scales. Each scale measured approximately 1.5 inches by 3 inches and was riveted to leather backing with bronze or iron studs. The complete armor system weighed between 70 and 90 pounds for the rider alone. The horse carried an additional 50 to 70 pounds of protection. Here's what made these warriors impossible to stop. The Cataphract wasn't just heavy cavalry. It was a living battering ram wrapped in steel. The Sassanid Persian records, preserved in the Karnamagi Artakshir-i Papagan Chronicle, describe cataphract charges that could punch through infantry formations 20 men deep. Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus, writing in his Res Gestae around 390 Common Era, documented Persian cataphracts breaking through the legendary Roman testudo formation at the Battle of Carrhae, something no other ancient military force had accomplished. The tactical innovation went beyond just armor. Professor David Nicoll's detailed analysis in Sasanian armies reveals that cataphracts fought with 12-foot lances called kontos, designed specifically for shock impact rather than thrusting. The rider sat in a 4-horn saddle that distributed the tremendous force of collision across the horse's back. Stirrups, possibly invented for cataphract warfare, gave the rider stability to absorb the crushing impact of lance-on-shield contact without being thrown from his mount. The mainstream explanation positions cataphracts as a natural evolution of cavalry warfare. Historians argue that the wealth of the Persian Empire simply allowed for better equipment, while the open terrain of Central Asia favored mounted warfare over infantry tactics. The standard military history suggests these were just well-equipped, heavy cavalry units, similar to later European knights, but with different armor styles adapted to their regional fighting conditions. But this explanation cannot account for the systematic terror cataphracts inspired across 1,000 years of warfare. Roman accounts describe entire legions fleeing at the sight of cataphract formations. The Strategicon of Emperor Maurice, written around 600 Common Era, devotes 3 entire chapters to countering cataphract tactics, more space than allocated to any other military threat. Byzantine military manuals continued, including anti-cataphract techniques centuries after the last Persian cataphracts had vanished from battlefields. The archaeological record reveals another impossibility. Doctor. Prudence Harper's Metropolitan Museum excavation reports from the 1970s show that cataphract armor manufacturing required industrial-scale metalworking operations. The standardization of scale sizes, the precision of the riveting, the quality control across thousands of pieces. This wasn't blacksmith work. This was mass production. The Sassanid Persians had somehow developed military industrial capacity that wouldn't reappear in Europe for 800 years. Some researchers suggest that cataphract technology represented a lost chapter in ancient engineering. The armor patterns found at Dura Europos match metalworking techniques that didn't officially exist until the High Middle Ages. The tactical formations described in Persian chronicles parallel European night charges with unsettling precision. It's as if medieval warfare was simply rediscovering what the ancient Persians had perfected and then forgotten. The silence in the historical record after 600 Common Era is equally puzzling. Cataphracts didn't fade away gradually, they vanished. The manufacturing knowledge, the tactical manuals, the breeding programs for war horses capable of carrying such weight, all of it disappeared within a single generation. No empire has ever voluntarily abandoned such decisive military superiority. How did ancient metalworkers achieve mass production standards that medieval Europe couldn't match? Why did Byzantine military manuals continue preparing for enemies that no longer existed? What force could make an empire abandon its most powerful weapons? Could the precision of cataphract warfare have influenced military development far beyond the Persian Empire's borders? Meanwhile, in the northern seas, another elite warrior tradition was taking shape that would serve emperors with equally mysterious loyalty. The Varangian Guard. You smell the salt wind off the Bosphorus mixing with incense and blood. The year is 1066. You're standing in the Hagia Sophia as Emperor Constantine X lies dying, and around his deathbed stand giants. Not Byzantine courtiers in silk robes, not Greek nobles with perfumed beards. Vikings, 7 feet tall and iron mail, gripping double-bladed axes that could split a horse in half. Their blonde braids hang past shoulders broader than doorframes. These are the Varangians, the emperor's bodyguard, and they're about to decide who rules the greatest empire on earth. The Varangian Guard represented one of history's most successful military innovations. Foreign mercenaries so elite, they became the ultimate symbol of imperial power. Established in 988, when Emperor Basil II recruited 6,000 Viking warriors from Prince Vladimir of Kiev, they served as the Byzantine Emperor's personal army for over 2 centuries. Dr. Sigfús Blöndal's definitive study, The Varangians of Byzantium, published in 1978, documented their service records through Byzantine administrative documents held in the Vatican secret archives. Professor Michael McCormick of Harvard's Medieval Studies program verified their payment schedules in his 2001 analysis of imperial treasury records. Here's what made them militarily impossible. These weren't just any warriors. They were selected from the most feared fighting culture in medieval Europe, then enhanced with Byzantine wealth and discipline. Each Varangian carried a 2-handed battle axe weighing 12 to 15 pounds, forged from the finest steel available. Byzantine chronicler Michael Attaliates recorded that a single Varangian could cleave through 3 armored men with one swing. Their axes had names, individual identities. They were passed down through generations of service. But their true power wasn't their weapons, it was their oath. The Varangians swore personal loyalty not to the Byzantine Empire, but to the emperor himself. When Emperor Basil died, they transferred their oath to his successor. When that emperor died, they swore again. For 216 years, no Varangian ever broke this oath. Not once. Byzantine historian John Skylitz has documented 14 separate occasions where Varangian guards died to the last man, rather than retreat or surrender. The mainstream explanation is that the Varangian guards succeeded because they combined Viking ferocity with Byzantine discipline and resources. They were elite foreign mercenaries who had no local political ties, making them perfectly loyal to the emperor alone. Their exotic appearance and fearsome reputation enhanced the emperor's prestige, while their military effectiveness protected his life. But this explanation cannot account for their extraordinary cultural transformation. These were Vikings, raiders who had spent centuries pillaging monasteries and burning cities. Yet within a generation of joining Byzantine service, they became the most disciplined, loyal, and ceremonially sophisticated military unit in the medieval world. John Kinnamos recorded that Varangians learned to read and write in Greek, studied Byzantine law, and performed complex court ceremonies with perfect precision. Some researchers suggest the transformation went deeper than military discipline. The Varangians weren't just serving the emperor, they were becoming Byzantine themselves while maintaining their Nordic identity. Archaeological evidence from Varangian graves in Constantinople shows burial goods that mix Viking weapons with Byzantine Christian symbols and Islamic coins. They were cultural hybrids. Northern European bodies wielding Mediterranean power. The mathematics of their loyalty defies explanation. During the Great Palace coup of 1042, 47 Varangians fought for 6 hours against 300 Byzantine soldiers and Arab mercenaries. All 47 died. Not one surrendered. Not one fled. Emperor Michael V was deposed anyway, but the Varangians had kept their oath. The new emperor, Constantine IX, ordered the dead Varangians buried with full imperial honors and double the pay of their replacements. Their wealth became legendary throughout Scandinavia. A single term of service in the Varangian Guard, typically lasting 4 years, could return a warrior home with enough gold to buy a kingdom. The Icelandic sagas record that Varangian veterans funded the construction of stone churches across Norway and Sweden. They brought back not just treasure, but knowledge. Byzantine military tactics, Islamic mathematics, and Christian theology that transformed Northern European culture. When Constantinople finally fell to the Fourth Crusade in 1204, the last Varangian guards died defending the imperial palace. The Crusader chronicler Geoffrey of Villehardouin wrote that they found 83 Varangian bodies in the throne room arranged in perfect formation around the empty imperial chair. They had kept their oath to an emperor who had already fled. How does a culture known for breaking oaths become famous for keeping them? What kind of loyalty survives the death of the man you've sworn to serve? Can foreign warriors become more native than the natives themselves? Why did the most feared raiders in Europe transform into the most trusted guards? Yet even the Varangians' impossible loyalty would pale beside the discipline of warriors taken as children and forged into something beyond human. The Janissaries. You can hear the screaming from inside the palace walls. It's June 15th, 1826, in Constantinople. The air tastes of gunpowder and burning flesh. Sultan Mahmud II has just ordered his artillery to fire point blank into the barracks of his own elite guard. The very soldiers who put his dynasty on the throne. The Janissaries, the slave soldiers who conquered half the world, are being slaughtered by their own emperor because they had become too powerful to control. The origins of this warrior caste stretch back to 1365, when Sultan Murad I implemented what Ottoman records call the devshirme, the blood tax. Every few years, Ottoman officials would sweep through Christian villages across the Balkans, selecting boys between 8 and 15 years old. The healthiest, the brightest, the strongest. Professor Caroline Finkel of the School of Oriental and African Studies documented in her 2005 work, Osman's Dream, how these children were torn from their families, converted to Islam, and subjected to rigorous military training that lasted up to 7 years. They learned not just warfare, but mathematics, literature, theology. They were forbidden to marry, forbidden to own property, forbidden any loyalty except to the Sultan himself. What emerged from this brutal system was something unprecedented in military history. By the 15th century, the Janissaries had become the first standing army in Europe to master gunpowder warfare. While Christian knights still charged with lances, the Janissaries deployed matchlock muskets with devastating precision. Military historian Gabor Agustin's analysis of Ottoman military records shows they maintained a core force of 12,000 elite infantry by 1450, equipped with standardized firearms and supported by specialized artillery units. The numbers tell the story of their dominance. When Sultan Mehmed II besieged Constantinople in 1453, his Janissary Corps operated the largest cannons ever deployed in medieval warfare, bronze behemoths weighing over 18 tons that could hurl stone balls weighing 600 pounds. The city that had withstood Islamic conquest for 8 centuries fell in 57 days. Professor Roger Crowley's Constantinople, The Last Great Siege, documents how Janissary musket volleys broke the final Byzantine charge at the Theodosian walls on May 29, 1453. The last Roman emperor died with a Janissary bullet in his chest. But the Janissaries evolved beyond mere soldiers. As the Ottoman Empire expanded across 3 continents, these slave warriors accumulated political power that their creators never intended. By the 16th century, they were kingmakers. When Sultan Osman II attempted to reduce their influence in 1622, the Janissaries stormed the palace and strangled him with a bowstring. They installed his uncle Mustafa on the throne instead. Professor Baki Tezcan of the University of California, Davis argues in the Second Ottoman Empire that between 1622 and 1726, the Janissaries effectively controlled imperial succession. The mainstream explanation for Janissary power focuses on their military effectiveness and gradual institutional decay. Standard histories argue that as the Ottoman Empire stopped expanding in the 17th century, these elite soldiers became a parasitic class, more interested in political manipulation than warfare. The devshirme system gradually broke down as Janissaries began marrying and recruiting their own sons, diluting their legendary discipline. By the 18th century, their ranks had swollen to over 100,000, making them financially unsustainable and militarily obsolete. But this conventional narrative cannot explain the sheer depth of Janissary political penetration. These were men taken as children from conquered territories, converted to an alien religion, and raised with no family connections to Ottoman society. Yet they managed to build a shadow state within the empire that could murder sultans with impunity. Some researchers suggest the Janissaries represented something more complex than military decay. They had become a parallel nobility that challenged the fundamental structure of Ottoman autocracy. The Janissary revolt system defied every principle of imperial control. Standard historical models predict that slave soldiers remain loyal to their masters through isolation and indoctrination. But the Janissaries did the opposite. They created their own networks, their own traditions, their own concept of legitimate authority that superseded the Sultan's divine right to rule. When Mahmud II finally destroyed them in 1826, He had to use European-trained troops because no other Ottoman force would fire on the Janissaries. Professor Virginia Axan's research into Ottoman military records reveals that Janissary units maintained their own internal justice systems, their own promotion hierarchies, and their own diplomatic relations with provincial governors. They had become a state within the state, governed by traditions that trace back to their founding as kidnapped children. How does a military caste built on childhood trauma and religious conversion develop the cohesion to challenge imperial authority for 4 centuries? Why could no other Islamic empire replicate the Devshirme system successfully? What psychological mechanisms allowed these stolen children to maintain unit loyalty while simultaneously betraying their imperial masters? Could the Janissary model explain other cases where elite military units turned against the governments that created them? The Janissaries proved that even the most carefully controlled military force could evolve beyond its creator's intentions, a lesson that would resonate centuries later among the warrior bands of medieval Russia. The Rus of Kievan Rus. You're standing knee-deep in the Dnieper River, watching silver flow like water itself. The year is 912. Constantinople's gold weighs down your longboat. Silk from China wraps around furs from the Arctic. Amber from the Baltic sits next to spices that traveled from India. You are Druzhina, elite, warrior merchant, and you have just made more profit in 6 months than entire kingdoms see in a year. The mathematics of what you've accomplished should be impossible. You've connected the frozen forests of Scandinavia to the golden domes of Byzantium using nothing but rivers, muscle, and calculated violence. Your trade route spans over 1,500 miles through hostile territory, crossing dozens of tribal boundaries, navigating rapids that have claimed hundreds of boats, all while carrying enough weapons to outfit a small army and enough wealth to buy a city. The archaeological evidence for the Druzhina's economic power emerged through decades of systematic excavation along the Dnieper trade route. Dr. Mikhail Tikhomirov's groundbreaking study, The Towns of Ancient Rus, published in 1959, first documented the scale of their burial complexes. Professor Elena Melnikova of Moscow State University expanded this work in her 2011 publication, The Eastern Route of the Vikings, providing precise inventory counts from Druzhina grave goods. The Gnezdovo archaeological complex alone has yielded over 4,000 burial mounds, dating from the 9th to 11th centuries. Here's what makes this impossible. Individual Druzhina burials contain wealth equivalent to pharaonic tombs. The Chernigov kurgan, excavated in 1873, contained over 40 pounds of silver, Byzantine silk worth a year's tribute from entire cities, weapons crafted in Damascus, and amber jewelry that required trade networks spanning from the North Sea to the Mediterranean. One grave, one warrior merchant. The total silver found in a single season of excavations at Gnezdovo exceeded the annual mint output of most European kingdoms. Dr. Roman Zurov of the Institute of Archaeology documented that Druzhina burial sites contain an average of 12 different currency types per grave, including Arabic dirhams, Byzantine solidi, and Anglo-Saxon pennies. The precision of their trade networks is staggering. Carbon dating and metallurgical analysis by Professor Ingmar Jansen of Uppsala University, published in Silver Economy in Viking Age Russia in 2008, proves these warriors were moving specific goods along predetermined routes with reliability that rivaled later Hanseatic League operations. The standard historical explanation positions the Druzhina as opportunistic raiders who evolved into traders through necessity. According to mainstream scholarship, they were Scandinavian adventurers who followed river systems south, gradually establishing trading posts that grew into permanent settlements. The wealth accumulation is explained as a natural result of controlling strategic choke points along river routes between northern fur producers and southern luxury markets. But the timeline doesn't support gradual evolution. Radiocarbon dating from the earliest Druzhina sites shows full-scale commercial operations appearing within decades of initial settlement. There's no archaeological evidence of a learning curve, no progression from raiding to trading. The wealth concentration is immediate and systematic. Professor Boris Rybakov's analysis of silver distribution patterns, published in Early Centuries of Russian History in 1982, demonstrates that Druzhina settlements were processing thousands of pounds of precious metals annually by 880 Common Era. The river knowledge required suggests something more complex than Viking opportunism. The Dnieper route includes 37 major rapids, seasonal flooding patterns that shift navigable channels monthly, and portage points that require intimate knowledge of local geography. Swedish runestones mention these routes by name, suggesting established navigation systems that predate the supposed first Viking expeditions. The Druzhina weren't discovering these routes, they were inheriting them. Some researchers suggest the Druzhina represent a fusion of existing Slavic river commerce with incoming Scandinavian military organization. The speed of their wealth accumulation, the precision of their trade networks, and the sophistication of their political structures indicate they were building on established foundations rather than creating new ones. The archaeological record shows Slavic settlements along these same river routes centuries before documented Viking arrival. How does a warrior class accumulate wealth that rivals empires within a single generation? What existing infrastructure enabled such precise long-distance commerce in the 9th century? Why do their burial practices combine Scandinavian ship symbolism with Slavic earthwork construction techniques? Who taught them which rapids could be navigated in spring floods, and which required winter portage? Where are the records of the river knowledge that made their empire possible? The answers to Druzhina wealth may lie not in the north with Vikings, but in the mobility of horses across open terrain. The Numidian light cavalry. You feel the thunder before you see them. The ground trembles beneath your sandaled feet as you stand in the Roman battle line at Cannae, 216 years before the Common Era. The morning sun catches something moving on the horizon, a dark wave flowing across the African plain like water finding its course. No formation, no neat ranks, just hundreds of riders moving as one organism, their horses' hooves drumming a rhythm that makes your stomach clench with recognition. These are Hannibal's Numidians. They carry no saddles, no bridles, no armor worth mentioning. Just javelins, shields, and a mastery of horsemanship that will help slaughter 70,000 Romans before the day ends. The Numidian cavalry emerged from the tribal confederations of North Africa as one of history's most feared military units, active from approximately 218 to 46 years before the Common Era. Dr. Dexter Hoyos of the University of Sydney documented their tactical innovations in his 2006 study, Truceless War, noting how these horsemen revolutionized ancient warfare through techniques that seemed to defy the accepted principles of mounted combat. The Roman historian Livy, writing in his Ab Urbe Condita, around 8 years of the Common Era, described encounters with Numidian cavalry units that could wheel, charge, and retreat with precision that baffled Roman tacticians trained in conventional cavalry doctrine. Archaeological evidence from sites across modern Tunisia and Algeria reveals the material culture of these warriors. Dr. Aicha Ben Abed of the National Institute of Archaeology and Art in Tunis published findings in 2011 showing that Numidian cavalry equipment was deliberately minimal, small, circular shields averaging 60 centimeters in diameter, lightweight javelins measuring 1.8 meters, and horses averaging 14 hands high. What made them impossible to counter wasn't their equipment, but their technique. Roman cavalry required saddles, bridles, and stirrups for effective combat. The Numidians rode bareback, controlling their mounts through leg pressure and voice commands alone, achieving a unity of movement that Roman sources consistently described as supernatural. The tactical records preserved in Polybius's Histories, written around 150 years before the Common Era, detail specific engagements where Numidian cavalry units, numbering fewer than 2,000 riders, repeatedly outmaneuvered Roman forces 5 times their size. At the Battle of Trebia in 218, before the Common Era, Numidian horsemen, under Hannibal's command, executed a feigned retreat that drew Roman cavalry units into a coordinated ambush, resulting in the near-total destruction of Roman mounted forces. Professor Barry Strauss of Cornell University, in his 2009 analysis, The Spartacus War, noted that Roman military manuals of the period contained no effective countermeasures for enemies who could fire accurately while retreating at full gallop. The mainstream explanation attributes Numidian cavalry effectiveness to superior horsemanship developed through generations of pastoral nomadism. Military historians argue that tribes who lived on horseback naturally developed riding skills that sedentary civilizations couldn't match. This explanation suggests that Numidian success stemmed from cultural adaptation societies that required mounted mobility for survival, producing warriors whose cavalry techniques reflected lifelong familiarity with horses. But the tactical complexity, documented in ancient sources, suggests something far more sophisticated than mere cultural adaptation. Roman records describe Numidian formations that could split, reform, and coordinate attacks across battlefields spanning several square kilometers without visible signaling systems. The Battle of Zama in 202. Before the Common Era provides the most puzzling evidence. Contemporary accounts by Polybius and later analysis by modern historian Adrian Goldsworthy in the Punic Wars describe how Numidian cavalry units simultaneously served under Hannibal and Scipio, switching sides mid-battle with coordination that enabled Scipio's victory. This tactical betrayal required advanced planning and communication methods that remain unexplained in Roman documentation. The precision of their mounted archery presents additional complications for conventional explanations. Tests conducted by experimental archaeologist Lars Anderson and published in the Journal of Ancient Warfare in 2016 demonstrated that accurate shooting from a galloping horse without stirrups requires biomechanical adaptations that take decades to develop. Yet Roman sources describe Numidian cavalry units recruiting from multiple tribal regions and achieving tactical cohesion within months of formation. Dr. Sabine Pansram of the University of Hamburg, writing in The Power of Cities in 2019, documented recruitment patterns suggesting that Numidian effectiveness couldn't be explained solely by inherited riding traditions. How did tribal horsemen develop tactical sophistication that consistently defeated professional armies? What communication methods allowed battlefield coordination across formations spread over miles of terrain? Why could other cavalry-based cultures never replicate Numidian effectiveness despite similar pastoral backgrounds? How did warriors fighting without saddles achieve mounted combat precision that modern riders struggle to match with full equipment? These questions point towards something larger, the possibility that conventional military history has systematically underestimated the tactical innovations of ancient warfare. What emerges from these 10 military formations is not just a catalog of tactical innovation, but a revelation about the nature of power itself. The sacred band's sacred bonds, the Mongol decimal system's mathematical precision, the Hussite wagons' technological revolution, the Persian immortals' psychological warfare, the Mamluk slave warriors, the Cataphract's armored shock, the Varangian mercenary loyalty, the Janissary child soldiers, the Druzhina brotherhood, and the Numidian mobility. Each represents a moment when someone looked at the fundamental assumptions of warfare and said, no, we can do this differently. We can break the rules everyone else follows. But here's what connects them all. They didn't just change how wars were fought. They changed what was possible. Each of these formations represented a civilization reaching beyond its apparent limitations, finding power in places others hadn't thought to look. The Thebans found it in love, the Mongols in organization, the Hussites in innovation, the Persians in fear, the Mamluks in transformation, the Cataphracts in technology, the Varangians in loyalty, the Janissaries in indoctrination, the Druzhina in brotherhood, the Numidians in speed. They took the raw material of human beings and forged something that transcended individual capability. And then they vanished. Not gradually, not through slow decline, but suddenly, completely, as if the very idea of them had become impossible. The sacred band fell in a single afternoon. The decimal system scattered across continents. The war wagons rusted in fields. The immortals became mortal. The Mamluks were massacred by modern rifles. The Cataphracts were made obsolete by gunpowder. The Varangians faded into legend. The Janissaries were disbanded by decree. The Druzhina dissolved into feudalism. The Numidians disappeared into Roman auxiliary units. Each revolutionary moment in warfare lasted just long enough to prove it was possible, then vanished, as if it had never been. What does it mean that our most transformative military innovations seem designed to self-destruct? What force ensures that every breakthrough in human organization eventually meets its own annihilation? And what other rules of power are we following right now that someone, somewhere, is preparing to rewrite completely?